Okay, so hopefully you can all see that. So I've entitled my talk, The Secrets of Aging Better, and hopefully I'm going to take you through some of the research that we do at Birmingham and give you some top tips for aging better. So, first of all, why should we be worried about aging? Well, really it's because we've now got an aging population, which has some benefits, but also we need to think about the possible challenges for us. So here are some of the UK statistics. And in the bottom here, in the sort of turquoise, we've got data from 1984 to 2009. And in that 25-year period, these are the under 16-year-olds, so the children. Birth rates are falling. But if we look up here at the light blue, these are the over 65-year-olds. And in that 25-year period, we acquired another 1.7 million over 65-year-olds. But the group that are actually growing at the fastest rate are the guys here in the dark blue. These are the over 85s. And in aging research, we call these folks the oldest old. And their numbers doubled in that 25-year period to 1.4 million. And the prediction is that by 2034, which is now really fast looming upon us, almost 1 in 4 of the population will be over 65 and 5% will be over 85. And another statistic I like to give is that the tradition in the UK of the monarch sending out a telegram when you reach 100 and saying, jolly well done for reaching 100. This was started by George V in 1917. So it's been going on for just over 100 years. And George sent out only 9 telegrams in 1917. But Queen Elizabeth last year sent out 13,500. So in just over 100 years, we've had an enormous increase in those reaching the landmark of 100 years. Now, that would be wonderful news. Public health and vaccinations and better water, all the rest, better medicine has caused this increase. And here's some data here. Here's female life expectancy increasing and male life expectancy. But what we're worried about is this bottom graph here. This is healthy life expectancy, the period that you spend in good health. And that started losing pace with life expectancy in the early 1990s. And if you look at this right-hand graph here, this on the far right is period spent in ill health. So males now on average will spend 16 years in ill health, and for females it's 19 years. So this is really why we're worried, and we're wanting to try to ensure that really everybody has a long life and a short period in ill health. But those are averages, and there's huge variation. So because I was invited by the u3a of Lichfield, here's some data from the Lichfield area in Birmingham. And this is a train line called the Cross City Line that goes from Longbridge right through to Lichfield. And just you can see the different life expectancies here. So if we go here from Snow Hill up through to Four Oaks, and you get the same data for Lichfield, you get just 8 stops on that cross city train, gives a difference of life expectancy of 9 years. So this is huge. So the period that you can expect to live for is really determined by a lot of socioeconomic factors. So your group of aging better lives is really very timely. And how we reach old age is also very variable. And I like to show it in this image here, which is my female actresses picture. And we have 3 ladies on the left here. And this image is when they were 21. On the top, we've got Sophia Loren, and then we've got Brigitte Bardot, and then we've got Liz Taylor. In the next image, they're 88. Here's Sophia Loren, quite amazing. In fact, she's still working. She was in Oscar nominated for a film directed by her son just last year. Brigitte Bardot, again, not acting anymore, but she's very active in animal cruelty organisations and has her own foundation. So I think we'd agree these are 2 folks who've really aged very well. It was a different story for Liz Taylor. This is Liz at 78. She never reached even 79, and she was wheelchair bound for much of her final years. So how we reach old age really is variable. So here we've got 3 ladies, same occupation, similar number of husbands, but very different outcomes. So this really tells us that aging really is quite malleable, and how you reach old age and how long you live for, really can be adjusted by what we do during our lives. But we need a description, a definition of aging. I'm not talking about just getting older. So biologically, we say that aging is becoming increasingly frail over time that reduces your ability to deal with any sort of stress and increases your chance of disease and death. So look at the guys here on the left having a great time. If any of those were put under a challenge, such as a fall, a hip fracture, then the ones that had aged more would be left frail as a result and possibly have an increased chance of infections and passing away. So that's what I mean by aging. So what sort of things happen as we get older? Well, most of you will know that there's a whole range of diseases that we've got an increased risk of as we get older. So here's arthritis here in the light blue. We've got heart disease there in the red and cancer in the grey. So all of these you've got an increased chance of as you get older. But how can we tackle this? How can we get better health in old age? Well, what we do at the moment, if you think about it, we've got all of these age-related diseases, cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, and we tackle them one by one. We do cancer research, heart disease research, and Alzheimer's research. And we also treat them separately medically. So if you've got several of these conditions, which older people often have, you end up seeing several specialists. But if all of these are caused, or a primary cause is getting older, then perhaps we should change what we do and tackle aging. And hopefully by the end of the lecture, I'll persuade you that's what we can do. So what sort of things influence how long you live for and how well you live for? Well, here's a little diagram that I like to show. So on the left, we've got adverse things, and on the right in green, beneficial things. So one of the things at the top here is there are certain genes, certainly you'll inherit them from your parents. So if you've picked your parents well, you may live a longer, healthier life. But interestingly, that's only about 20% of the influence of how long you live for and how well you live for is genetic. The rest is non-genetic. One of the things is your experience when you're in the womb, so an optimal fetal environment, so the mother having good nutrition, etc., will influence it. But the major influence is actually lifestyle and what I'll call a clean environment. So not being in cramped accommodation, not having high levels of pollution. So this is really, these are the three optimums. And I'm going to focus on lifestyle for really most of the rest of the lecture. So why the focus on lifestyle? Well, this increase in life expectancy is really very recent. We've got the years missing on the left here, but this is about 30. So really until about 150 years ago, life expectancy swung between 30 and 40 years. And an awful lot of children died before they were 5 years old. Women were dying in childbirth, etc. But then, as I said, things changed and we had this dramatic increase in life expectancy. And I want you to think about this in evolutionary terms. So here's some of the things to get your head around. What I've got down here on this bottom axis is your probability of living to be an adult. And then on the y-axis here, your life expectancy once you become an adult. So what we've got here are basically our nearest primate relatives. So gorillas, chimpanzees, baboons. And those guys, they've got about a 50% chance of getting to adulthood, not dying when they're children. And once they get there, they live about 10 years. So for most monkeys, their life expectancy is about 20, 30 years, not much more than that. 5 million years of evolution later, we've got the hunter-gatherer tribes, the Ache, the Hadza, the Hiwi. And in that 5 million years, their chance of living to maturity increases to about 60, 70%. And they're now living about 40 years beyond once they get to adulthood. So about, 50, 60 years maximum, absolute maximum. And then we've got here the recent Japanese and Swedish data. And in just 250 years later, we've got this massive increase in life expectancy and pretty well everybody gets to adulthood. But what I would argue is that is not long enough for us to evolve, for us to change our biology and to become accustomed to modern lifestyles. So if you think about it, in modern society compared to hunter-gatherers, we're much more sedentary. Many of us have desk jobs now. We're not out trying to catch saber-toothed tigers and having infrequent food, so we have most of us food readily available. So these are big changes for us. And I would argue and hopefully persuade you now that this is a major driver of aging. And so if I go through the talk now to try and persuade you then. So what's some of the evidence that diet might be influencing how we age? Well, these are experiments with a technique called caloric restriction. If you just excuse me, I'm just plugging in my laptop to get more power. So caloric restriction is a technique where these animals, and you can go from a yeast right through to this little worm here, C. elegans, through to fruit flies. What you do is you give them about 25 to 30% less calories in their food, and then you see how long they live for. And here's some of the data at the bottom here. So this red line, this is how quickly they die. So the maximum life expectancy of this little worm is about 26 days. That's the blue. But if you restrict their calorie intake, they live 10 days longer. And this is true for fruit flies, mice, lots of different species. So you can extend how lifespan and how healthy they are by reducing calorie intake. So diet is a big influence. And you might say, but is this true for higher species? These are worms and flies. Well, it turns out it is. So these are data from studies in macaque monkeys. And I think the picture really tells you everything. So on the left here, this is a monkey that has eaten whatever it liked ad libitum. And he's now 33 years old, which in these monkey terms, equivalent to humans, is about 75, 80 years old. And hopefully you can see that look at this bottom picture, he's lost a lot of his fur. The poor guy's got this curvature of the spine, kyphosis. He's lost a lot of his muscle. You can't see from the image, but the poor guy's got cataracts. He's lost a lot of his teeth. So this is an old monkey, an aged monkey. Look at the guy on the right. This is the same age, but he's been calorically restricted. So he's eaten 25 to 30% calories. Just look at this guy. You don't have to be a monkey expert to see there's a difference here. So he's got no cataracts, full set of teeth. He's lost none of his hair, and just look at this spine. I always say he looks like a really spunky monkey. You know, this is really quite amazing. What about their lifespan then? In the red again, this is the ones that have eaten whatever they like. And by 33 years of age, only about 1 in 5 of them are still left alive. But of the calorically restricted, almost 60% are still alive. So they're living longer. But if we look at how healthy they are, this is every week they see if the animals have got any age-related diseases. And in those that have eaten what they like, only about 1 in 4 of them are disease-free. So most of them, like that monkey on the left, have got some problems. But the calorically restricted are really healthy. 70% of them are completely disease-free. So it looks like reducing calorie intake works in primates. What about humans? Well, of course, we haven't got any studies in humans. The longest one that's ever happened is people have been put on caloric restriction for 6 years. But the best data we've got is actually what we call epidemiological data. And this is data from Okinawa, which is an island off the southern tip of Japan. And what they do, they have this social behavior that they say you should always leave the table slightly hungry and you should leave some food on your plate. And the Okinawans have the highest number of centenarians in the world by a long, long way. Their nearest competitor is Japan, but the incidence of centenarians is 18.5 per 100,000 in the Okinawans and 4.5 per 100,000 in Japan. And when you look at what they eat, the children eat about 60% of the calories that we recommend in the UK, and adults about 80%. So they calorically restrict. So we know they're longer lived. Are they healthier? Well, yes, they are. If you compare Okinawans to Americans, they have less cognitive decline, they have less cancers, they have less hip fractures and fewer heart attacks. So it looks like even in humans that having a lower calorie intake will help. But it's not going to catch on, is it? If you think of the problems we've got at the moment with the obesity epidemic, I think trying to get everybody to eat 25 to 30% less is just not going to work. And you might say, well, I live 25% longer, but do I really want to on 25 to 30% calories? I don't think I would. So there's other ways around it. There's studies now on intermittent fasting, where people just fast for 18 hours a day and they just eat food for 6 hours a day, rather like some of the ethnic populations do at Ramadan. It's a similar thing. And it turns out it seems to have the same effect. There's only animal studies so far, only short-term studies in humans, but it looks like you don't have to fast all of the time. But the other thing is, perhaps there are drugs that we can use that have the same effect as caloric restriction. And we do know how caloric restriction works. And the other one would be to say, well, perhaps we can use drugs to inhibit aging processes, because again, that's what caloric restriction is doing. It's slowing down and inhibiting aging. So what about drugs that mimic caloric restriction? So this one, some of you may know, and some of you may even be taking this drug. It's called metformin. And it's a drug that is used to treat type 2 diabetes. And what's been shown in a whole range of animals, and these are data for mice, is that you give animals metformin, they live longer. So here's the survival curves. In the black line here, these are the mice that haven't had metformin, and these are the ones in the dashed line that have, so they live longer, and they're also healthier. This is what we call a treadmill test at the bottom left here. So you put the animals on a little treadmill and see how long they can run for. And the ones on metformin can run for longer. And these are older mice when they do this. This is a test of cognitive function. It's called the open field test. And the mice return their cognitive function better. And they have slightly fewer cataracts. So certainly it looks in mice and other animals that metformin has some of the, can mimic caloric restriction. What about humans? Well, there are studies ongoing at the moment, but they're not finished. But the best evidence we have is that if you compare, so this is what I call crude event rate. This means the rate at which people are dying. If you compare diabetics who are on metformin versus an alternative drug called a sulfonylurea, the metformin diabetics die at a much slower rate, much slower. And in fact, almost as similar as healthy controls. So there is some evidence that in humans that metformin can have the same action. And as I said, there's some large trials now, one in Newcastle and the other one in the US, testing this out actually in healthy older adults to see if it will slow down the pace of aging. So what about that other option then? What if we could actually directly inhibit aging mechanisms? Now, until recently, we couldn't do this because we just didn't know what caused aging, but now we do. And this is a bit of a complicated figure, but basically it's got 3 stages. What we know now is what causes aging is the buildup of damage in your body, a bit like rust on a car. And there's lots of different forms. You can have damage to your DNA, you can have damage to your proteins and also to fats in the body. Now, when you're younger, you can get rid of that damage. You just, you can clear it, no problem. But as we get older, we're not as good at getting rid of that damage. So what happens is then what we got called a response to that damage, the cells in your body become stressed. They don't function as well. So you can get structures called your mitochondria, which make energy for you. They don't function as well. And what eventually happens is your cells enter a state called senescence. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. And what senescent cells do is they can't grow. So if you run out of a particular type of cell in your body, you might lost of some of your intestinal cells, then you're less able to replace them because your cells have become senescent. But also these senescent cells cause inflammation in the body, and that in fact is the major way they cause damage. And how do we know that they're causing aging? Well, again, this is a bit of a complicated slide, but I'll take you through it. So we knew even from back in the 1960s that as you get older, you have more of these senescent cells in your body, but we didn't know that they caused aging until 2011, so just over 10 years ago, when this amazing study was published. And what they did, this group, they took a mouse and they changed its genes so that every time a cell became senescent, it was removed from the body. So you had a mouse with no senescent cells. So just look at this picture at the bottom left here. This is an old mouse that they didn't do anything to. It had its senescent cells, and you can see it looks like a really old mouse. It's got this hump on its spine. Again, it's lost a lot of its muscle, and it's got cataracts. But this is the one that's also old, but has had its senescent cells removed. And you can see it just looks like a young mouse. And when they looked at all sorts of things, like these are the rate at which they collect cataracts, it was slower. So these mice were healthier. Now, of course, in humans and any other being, we're not going to be able to genetically manipulate people so that they get rid of their senescent cells as they get older. So what we're doing in research is we're developing drugs, we're using drugs that will kill these senescent cells. And so this is just quickly to show you that inflammation I told you about. So this is a study we did 12 years ago now, where we looked at people. Baseline here is when they're 62 to 72, and follow-up is 10 years later when they're 72 to 82. And this is a measure in the blood of how inflamed the person is. And you can see that it increases, and this is another one. And basically what we found out was the more inflammation that somebody has, the frailer they were in old age and the more diseases they have. So this inflammation is how these senescent cells cause aging. So try to remember that out. It'll come up again later on in the talk, this inflammation. And here's some of that data on drugs that kill the senescent cells. So again, this is in mice now, but this is looking at osteoporosis, the loss of bone as the mice get older. And what they've done is they've taken one group of mice and given them one of these drugs that kills senescent cells, and the other ones didn't. And the top here, these are the ones, this is a section through a spine. And I hope that you can see that in the mice that didn't have this drug to kill senescent cells, they've got big holes in their spine. So they've got osteoporosis. But the ones that had the drug to kill the senescent cells, they have many less holes and much less osteoporosis. And it's been used now in kidney disease and even actually in dementia. So this field is moving at a pace. And you might be listening saying, but oh yes, this is going to take years to get to humans. Not so. The first study of one of these drugs in humans was conducted and published in 2019. So there are now 40 of these clinical trials going on. And this was a trial where they used one of these drugs in a lung disease called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And it's a really nasty lung disease. And they used this disease because they knew it had lots and lots of senescent cells in the lungs of these patients. And what they did was they gave the patients these drugs for just 3 days each month for 3 months. So they're not on these drugs for long term. And after just 3 months, they found that these patients were less frail. They had better mobility, they could walk quicker, they could get out of a chair easier. So quite amazing. So it really looks like these are going to be the drugs that are going to be coming to clinical practice really quite soon. Okay, so that's the diet and the drug side. What about the other side of the coin then? What about physical activity? So that's the other side of lifestyle. We've got food readily available, but we're also much more sedentary. So here's some data. So this is data that's what we call objective data. So there are lots of data that ask people, how much physical activity do you do? And I'm afraid we're not very good at recording that. We tend to say a bit more than we actually do. So this is people who've actually worn something like a Fitbit. So we've actually measured what they do. So on the left here, we've got men and we've got ladies on the right. So in the light blue are the people who are doing very little physical activity, and it goes from 16 here up to 65 plus. And you can see as that we get older, the men, there's more people doing very little physical activity. The dark blue at the bottom are the ones who are meeting the chief medical officer's guidelines of doing 150 minutes of exercise, aerobic exercise a week. And only about 5% of men are doing that. Ladies were even worse. You can't even see us down here. We're 1 to 2%. So we become much more inactive as we get older. So we wondered, well, how much of getting older is due to this increase in physical inactivity? And to address this, we did this experiment, and some of you may have seen this on the television. It got a lot of coverage. What we did was we took 125 cyclists who had been cycling all of their adult lives, basically. So they'd been maintained their physical activity. We had 84 men and 41 women, aged 55 to 79. So if they were going to show signs of aging, they would have done it by then. And they had to be doing a lot of cycling, so 100 kilometres in under 6.5 hours for a man and 60 kilometres in under 5.5 hours for a woman. And they had to have done that at least twice in the last 3 weeks. But you name it, we measured it. They came into the lab, they spend 2 days with us, and we take blood samples, we take muscle biopsies, we look at their heart, their lungs, everything. What did we find? I'm just going to show you some of the data. Here's data for BMI. So this is basically how much fat you've got in the body, and there's fat on the bottom, and it's split down into 5-year groups, so 55 to 59, 60 to 64, etc. And you'll hear lots of people say, but oh, as you get older, you always, increase your BMI and you get more fat in the body. Well, you don't if you keep physically inactive. So that's something to do with not doing enough physical activity, because in these cyclists, both the men and the women, they did not increase the amount of fat in the body as they get older. And this is crucial because fat is one of the places that those senescent cells live. They like to live in fat and they feed off fat. And so the more fat you have in the body, you will have more senescent cells. And I'll touch on that in a moment again. What about other factors? Again, many of you may be aware that as we get older, our leg strength declines. So it's a little bit harder to get up the stairs. It's a little bit harder to get out of a chair without moaning and groaning. So here's again the age-related decline in leg strength. We've got men on the left and women on the right. And this line here going across, this orange line, is how much leg strength you need to be able to get off a chair without help. And if you think about that, that's how much strength you need to be able to get off the toilet as well. Once you've lost that strength, you lose your independence. And you can see the age-related decline. It's worse for ladies because we start with less muscle strength anyway. So we're much more prone to this age-related leg strength loss and frailty. Why does that happen? Well, it's because we lose muscle when we get older. This is a cross-section. This is a scan through a thigh of a 21-year-old versus a 63-year-old. And the brown stuff here, that's the muscle, and the white stuff is fat. And you can see lots of muscle in the young person. But look at the 63-year-old. A lot of that muscle is gone, and instead there's fat tissue. So this is why we lose that leg strength. What happened in the cyclists? So here, SMI, this is how much muscle they've got. The black dots are the ladies, the triangles are the men, and these are the different ages going across. And hopefully you can see that it doesn't really change. It just moves across. There's no decline across, so they don't lose muscle. Tug, this is their leg strength. That doesn't decline either. There's a slight, this is hand grip strength. So there's a little bit of decline in the men, but we think that's because cycling doesn't particularly strengthen the arms, but we didn't see anything in the ladies. So overall, that loss of muscle strength is all to do with not being active enough, and particularly not doing strength type exercises. What about bone mass? So again, when we looked at bone density, the ladies didn't decline, slight decline in the men, mainly actually in their hip region. But again, nothing like you would see in people who are not physically active. So that's also largely down to being not physically active enough as we get older. But it doesn't stop everything. Some things are part of a natural biological process that we will have to intervene in other ways. So overall fitness, it's called VO2 max, that declined across age with our cyclists. This is lung function, that declined with age. And the maximum heart rate that they could achieve still declined with age. So we will need another technique to try and address that issue. But you may be sitting there thinking, well, Professor Lord, I'm not really surprised that cyclists have better muscle and better bone because, they're doing lots of exercises. What about another system that ages that seems unconnected with muscles and bones and with exercise? And this is the immune system. So I'm actually an immunologist by training. And as Janet said right at the start, I work largely on immune aging. So if you think about your immune system, what it has to do is it has to be able to detect and kill infections, pathogens, so bacteria, viruses like COVID. It has to be able to work better when it sees infection the second time. That's how vaccinations work. We call it immune memory. It also has a role in cancer, so it is also involved in killing early cancer cells, and it must do all of that without damaging our cells. So what's the evidence that your immune system ages? Well, COVID was a great example. This is the number of deaths from COVID with age and we've got males and females. And you can see that the older you were, the greater chance there was of you passing away if you succumbed to the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So your immune system just isn't as good as dealing with infections as you get older. Vaccinations also, it's the same. This is the antibody response. So when you're vaccinated, you make an antibody, and we measure that to see how well you've responded. And basically, if you're above this line, you've made enough antibody to be protected. So you can see as you get older, there's less chance you make a good response to a vaccine. And once you get to 70, much less chance you'll make a good response. And also the immunity you've got isn't long-lived. And that's in fact why we're having boosters to COVID, because as you get older, the antibodies you've got just don't hang around long enough. So that's why we've got, in fact, I had my booster yesterday. What causes this? Well, one of the big causes is you've got an organ called the thymus, and this is a mouse picture because I could never persuade any of my older adults to donate their thymus, because it sits just above your heart. It sits on top of your heart, and its job is to make immune cells, particular ones called T cells. And you need the thymus to be continually making those cells so that you can respond well to vaccinations and you can respond to new infections like SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. And that's the mouse. Here's the picture in humans. And it actually is one of the first age-related changes you see. So your thymus starts to shrink from about 18 to 20 years old. And by the time you're at 65 plus, you've only got about 5% of your thymus left. So it's one of the causes of this immune aging. What happened in the cyclists? Well, this was amazing. Again, we can't persuade them to open the rib cage and let us look at their thymus, but this is a measure we can do to see how many new T cells have come out of the thymus. So here's each dot is a person. So here's young people. Now here's healthy old who haven't been exercising, and they have less of these new T cells because their thymus has shrunk. But with the cyclists, they had the same range and level as young people. So doing lots of exercise protects your thymus. And it seems to be something to do with the fat in the body. So the more fat you have in the body, the less thymus you have. And how does exercise do this? Well, it turns out it's that inflammation again. So the more inflammation you have, the less thymus you have. So look at this middle panel. Oops. This is one of those markers of inflammation, TNF. There's healthy young. There's healthy old who don't exercise. So that's age-related increase in inflammation. But the cyclists had less of this. So they haven't got as much inflammation. But they've got more of a molecule in the body that's made by muscle that actually causes the thymus to grow. It's called interleukin 7. So here's young people. You make less of that if you're older and you don't exercise. But here's the cyclists. They make as much as the young people. So this is how it seems to work. The other thing is that exercise seems to kill those senescent cells. So again, this is a complicated picture, and this is in mice because we're doing this in humans at the moment, but we haven't got the data yet. Just look at this middle panel here. These are young mice. These are ones that have been fed a high-fat diet and are old. And this is counting how many senescent cells they've got in their fat tissue, and they've got lots more. But if we exercise them, you can see they've got many less of these cells. So it looks like exercise can also kill those senescent cells. So all round good thing to do. But you're all sitting out there saying, but Professor Lord, I don't want to cycle 100 kilometers a week, and I don't either. I don't like cycling. So we did this study looking at what about your step counts? That might be something that a lot of you count. And you may hear that you've got to do 10,000 steps a day. Well, there actually was no evidence base for that. It was just made up by a Japanese company who sold Fitbits. But we looked into this. And what we did was we took a large group of older adults called the Birmingham 1000 Elders that I work with. And we got them to measure their step counts. And then we measured how much of that inflammation they had that causes aging. And if they did less than 3,000 a day, they had a very high level. If they were doing 5,000 to 7,000 a day, they did less. And 10K, they were the best. But this tells you that even if you're doing 5,000 to 7,000 steps a day, you're going to be helping yourself. So you don't actually have to be doing 100 kilometers a week of cycling. Just keeping your step count up will do it. Okay, so the last little bit then is in the activity bit is sedentary behavior. As I said, we're very sedentary and we actually sit, most of us, for 15 hours a day. And the question we asked, well, this is me running, by the way, that's the thing that I like to do. If I do my exercise and then I sit all day, does it matter? And there was a study that came out that showed, yes, it does, I'm afraid. So what they did was they got one group of people that just sat all day, didn't do any exercise. Another one that did an hour of exercise in the morning, but then sat all day. And then another group that got up every hour and did some exercise. And this is the data. This is how healthy their metabolism was. So this is the people who just sat all day, no exercise. These are the exercises that then sat. You can see no difference. They didn't benefit. It was only the ones that broke up their sitting time that benefited. So it's really important. So what you can do about this, if any of you are still working, try a standing desk. So I normally stand all day. But if you can't, just try to break up your sitting for at least an hour at a time. Don't sit for more than an hour at a time. Okay, so the last little bit, I know a lot of you will be thinking about, one of the things that people really worry about is their cognitive function. So I'm going to finish really with thinking about what can we do to help cognitive function as we get older. And the problem with this area of research is that the vast majority of research was done by just looking at people when they got to be, say, 75 years old, and asking them, well, what do you do? Do you eat lots of oily fish? Do you do crossword puzzles? And then testing their cognitive function. The problem with that is you don't know how good their cognitive function was when they were younger. So perhaps their function has declined, but it's still pretty good. So I want you to sit there as you're listening now. So these are some of the things you'll have read about in the media. And I want you to say to yourself which one you think is important for protective cognitive function. So first of all, is it eating more oily fish or taking fish oil supplements? Is it doing crossword puzzles or reading a lot? Is it doing more physical activity? Perhaps drinking only in moderation? What about speaking 2 languages fluently or not smoking? Well, the best study that's addressed this is an amazing study called the Lothian Birth cohort. And this is amazing because the Scottish government in 1938 decided that Scottish school children were becoming less cognitive well, so more stupid. I don't know why they thought this, but they did. So they tested every 11-year-old, so every child born in 1927 had their IQ tested in Scotland in 1938. And they were asked all about their home life, what their parents did for a living, etc. But then those, of course, World War II came along and those ledgers were just put in the Department of Health down in the basement and forgotten about until about 10 years ago, well, it's got to be 20 years ago now. And it was these ledgers were discovered by Professor Ian Deary at Edinburgh University. And so he realized he'd got a gold mine here. And what he did was he contacted those people and he's managed to get almost 2,000 of them now when they were 75 years old. And Richard Wilson from One Foot in the Grave was one of those tested, and he's tested their IQ again, and he's found out all about their lifestyles. So what did he find? What sort of things actually protected the cognitive function of these children when they became 75 years old? So eating more oily fish? No, the things in white are not. The ones that ate oily fish, you know, there was no difference whether they had a high IQ to start with or to finish with. It wasn't a factor. Crossword puzzles, no, it wasn't. It wasn't a factor. Physical activity was. The ones that had done more physical activity, they retained their cognitive function better. Drinking in moderation, no, that turned out not to be a factor. Speaking 2 languages fluently was, and not smoking was the big one. If you didn't smoke, they really had the best retention of cognitive function. So I hope that's given you a few tips going forward. So the last little bit then, to pull it all together, there was this study done by Katie Core at the University of Cambridge, and she looked at over 20,000 people and looked at their lifestyles and saw how long they lived for. So she looked at them first when they were in the 50s and 60s and then followed them. And this is how quickly they pass away. And what they did was they found that there were essentially 4 major lifestyle factors. If you're, and you want you to add them up on your hands now. So if you're a non-smoker, you give yourself 1 point. If you've got moderate alcohol intake, so that's between 1 and 14 units a week, 1 point. Physically active, so that's meeting those chief medical officers guidelines, 150 minutes of exercise a week, that's 1 point. And if you have 5 portions of fruit or veg a day, 1 point. And you essentially get 3.5 more years of healthy lifestyle, of healthy life expectancy for each point you got. So if you score all 4, you're going to live 14 years longer than somebody who scores 0. So hopefully that's helpful. And the very last thing is there, I've got a study going at the moment. So we're using a nutritional compound to see if we can reduce that age-related inflammation. And I put this slide in because originally, of course, I was invited by folks in Lichfield. But if you do happen to be 60 and over and you're in good health and you live in or close to Birmingham, it's a 3-month study with this nutritional supplement to try to reduce inflammation. And if you are interested, contact me on that email address, and I can send you more details. I've only got about 5 places left, and I realise you're scattered all over the country. But if there are any who are interested, just get in contact. And at that point, I'll take questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Janet. Just before I hand over to Janet, just to let you know, we are recording this session. So if you prefer not to be on the screen at all, if you take your camera off. So over to you, Janet, to ask Janet some questions on behalf of everyone. So please put them through as many as you want. And Janet will do our very best to ask Professor Janet on your behalf. So thank you, everyone.
Well, thanks a lot, Janet. That's been absolutely fascinating. One question that just popped up that I noticed, somebody saying, so if you drink 0 alcohol, is that even better?
No, it isn't, strangely enough. I get that question a lot. No, it's between 1 and 14. So we know that just having a small amount of alcohol, perhaps even just 1 glass of red wine a week, does seem to benefit your heart, and that's where the benefit is. Yeah, so I can see some people chuckling away there. So yes, you don't have to be a teetotaler. So even if you just give yourself perhaps 1 unit a week, it makes that difference.
Well, that's very encouraging.
Yes, so just don't go over the top. Don't go over your 14 units, then you'll get into trouble.
Okay, and we have another question. Tell us about fibromyalgia, whether rest and sleep improve muscle function.
Oh gosh, yes. Yes, so fibromyalgia, many of you won't know, it's quite a painful, it's a muscle ache, and it's caused by a buildup of fibrotic tissue in the body. We still don't fully understand why this happens. But one of the best, even though patients are often in pain, we often recommend trying to do some resistance exercise, some band work, you know, stretchy bands, put them on your legs and try and stretch, and that will build the muscle up. And when muscle is active, one of the reasons muscle is really beneficial is it can control that inflammation in the body and the inflammation in the muscle as well. So that's about, you know, one of the things we can recommend for fibromyalgia at the moment.
Thank you. And another question here is, if you lose height, as I've done post-menopause, I have a fatter waist measurement and I'm now pre-diabetic. Is that related to aging?
It is, I'm afraid, yes. So this loss of muscle with age does cause us to shrink. So yes, most of us can lose a few centimeters, to be honest, in height. But again, if you're pre-diabetic, exercise will certainly help. It will bring that inflammation down. It will help you to control the blood sugar better. So yeah, I'm going to say exercise for everything, of course. But yes, but we do know certainly in that pre-diabetic syndrome, you know, certainly watching your diet, keeping your body weight down, because like I said, fat tissue is where those senescent cells, they love to live there. They feed off the fat. And so the less fat tissue that you have, the better. Yeah.
And we've had a question about someone noting that there was an 87-year-old running in the London Marathon this year, and wondering if a 75-year-old reasonably active but who doesn't run or cycle should start training now for a future marathon. Restrict my food intake.
Yes, yeah. Well, basically, the answer is no. If you want to do a marathon, do it. But all of our research shows that actually short bursts of intense exercise are good for you. So if you've got a hill near you, or I always say to the older adults who work with me, going upstairs is amazing. So if you still live in a house with stairs, just going up and down stairs 10 times is an amazing exercise. It's aerobic going up and it's resistance exercise coming down, which is good for your muscles. So no, you do not have to do a marathon, although I am an ex-marathon runner, but I now have a dodgy right knee, so I have had to cut the marathons out, I'm afraid.
And so another question.
Brisk walking is great. Like I said, brisk walking, dancing, up and down stairs, all good.
And another question is it ever too late to make a difference?
Oh gosh, a good question. Answer no. So again, in lots of our studies, we've done exercise interventions with adults who've got rheumatoid arthritis, who are pre-diabetic, and we've had them exercising just 3 times a week, doing just short bursts of intense exercise, and they all improve. They improve their inflammation, for rheumatoid arthritis, their pain goes down. So it's never too late, because these were all older adults, at least 60 years old. So it's never too late. Even if you haven't got a disease condition, it's never too late. You can always improve.
Thanks, Janet. That's encouraging. And somebody has asked a question which actually is quite pertinent to me, and I'm sure for several of us here. Does sleeping time make a difference? And if I could just add to that, I mean, we all, you know, when you lie awake in the middle of the night, you think, my brain's not cleaning itself, I'm going to get dementia. So what do we do about that, us insomniacs?
It's an incredibly good question. So as we get older, we do sleep less. And there's a thing called a phase shift. So you tend to wake up earlier in the morning and you find that you're getting tired napping in the afternoon. So we do know that if you get lower than 5 hours sleep, that you need to try to do something about it. And again, physical activity will help. A simple thing like warm milk before you go to bed, avoid caffeine, but actually warm milk, and strangely enough also bananas have a compound in them that helps you to sleep naturally. So as long as you're getting more than 5 hours, you can cope as you get older. The perfect is actually 6.5 to 7 hours, but I'm a rubbish sleeper. I really struggle with my sleep. So yeah, but sleep is important. We know it's important for your immune system. It's important for muscles, for brain function, for cognitive function. So yeah, if you're having sleep problems, do try to do something about it. But that waking up earlier in the morning and napping is part of normal aging, I'm afraid.
Thank you. And we've got somebody says, will your wonderful anti-aging wonder drug be available on demand on the NHS or privately anytime soon?
Yeah. So the nutritional side, if that does prove to work, yes. So the study's funded by Bayer. They're the company making the product. And yeah, their plan is, so our study should finish in March next year. And their plan is to put it on the market in 2024. And it's all stuff that's 2024.
That presumably would be by prescription only.
No, you'll be able to buy it over the counter because it's just nutritional things. It's things like fish oil. It's 8 components together. So yeah, it's the drug side.
Do you know what it will be called?
It's going to be called Essentials.
Essentials.
Essentials. Yeah.
Okay, we'll better keep our eyes open for that.
Exactly. But the drugs I told you about, those senescent killing drugs, it will probably be, I think, probably more like 5 to 10 years before they're in the NHS, because the trials are ongoing now. Yeah. So it's going to be a bit longer with those drugs, and they will only be prescription. Although interestingly, there is one that's actually a strawberry extract, and that's in trials at the moment, and that seems to work as well. It's called Fisatin, which is Fisetin. Fisatin, and that's looking interesting. And that is something you can buy readily. It's in Holland and Barrett, or you can buy it online. But you know, but the trials are still ongoing. We don't know if they're going to work, but in animals it certainly works. It certainly seems to kill those senescent cells. So that may be why berries and strawberries, maybe why they're good for you.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And we have, sorry, we've got so many questions here. If you have arthritic joints, is it better to stop or push on with exercise?
Oh no, definitely push on. Yes, so we've done lots of work with rheumatoid arthritis, and actually it reduces your disease scores, the amount of inflammation you've got. It reduces pain. So it's, yeah, definitely push on. Even if you're still finding it a bit painful, just doing a little bit will really help. Because if you think about it, it increases the circulation to the joint areas, which helps take some of the toxic stuff away. So yeah, it definitely helps. It's very, very clear.
And well, somebody's made a point here. Sorry, can I just say there's a couple of people who've asked very, very specific questions for their medical reasons, and I won't ask those now.
Yes.
Because I think they're too specific. I'm picking out the general ones, so
yes.
Apologies to those people. But someone said talked about her mother used to go to a specialist small group at a hospital run by nurses, where they monitored health, had exercise and advice, and just bemoaning the fact that you know, she really benefited from it.
Absolutely.
But funding closed it. And obviously, I mean, that's just a fact of life, isn't it? That we're not
It is, but hopefully through u3a and you talking to your friends, you can get the message out that, you know, whatever you do now, you know, like those 4 points I gave at you, and if you've got 3 points, try and get number 4. If you've got 2, try and get another 1. Anything you do will help. I always say, you know, we're in control of our bodies. You know, if the NHS is not doing those clinics and things for the moment, let's just go out and do it ourselves. It's not rocket science. You know, just go out, do a brisk walk. You don't have to walk for 1 or 2 hours. Just doing that brisk walk, getting your breathing going, but get a bit of sweat going. That's all you need to do for as little as 10 to 15 minutes. Like I said, that's why I said the up and down stairs is just a brilliant exercise. Well,
that's really inspirational, Janet. And given that we've got people representing u3as all over the country, what we could each do is set up the healthy aging group in our own u3a areas, couldn't we? Volunteer to run it.
You could do it. Many of you may have walking groups in your area, things like that, because social interaction is important as well. I haven't done that in the talk at all today, but it is really important. Social isolation, we know, is a killer. Again, because it stresses you, it ages you. So
and I'm just going to take 2 last questions before we stop. One, somebody says, what about water? Most of us don't drink enough. And someone else says, is sugar poisonous?
Right. So no, sugar isn't poisonous. Basically, you need sugar. It's a carbohydrate. You need it to help with energy in the body. So no, that one's been, you don't want too much of it, of course, because you'll put weight on. That's the only way, but it's not poisonous. And water, it's interesting. So all of those stories, so you do need to drink a reasonable amount, but those stories of you have to drink 2 litres a day, I'm afraid there's no scientific evidence behind it at all. You might guess who's pushing those stories, people who make bottled water. Yeah, just drink enough so that your urine is a nice sort of pale yellow colour, but nothing more than that. You don't drinking 2 litres a day, I find quite difficult. But yeah, there's no scientific evidence behind that at all, I'm afraid.
Well, I think quite a lot of people think, you know, if you have a cup of tea, does that count towards the 2 litres?
Well, yeah, it's fluid, although it's got caffeine in it. It's still, and I'm a big tea fan, I'm a big tea drinker. So yeah, of course it counts towards it. I saw somebody put a question up, what about yoga and Pilates? Yes, absolutely. Yes. Excellent exercises. They count as resistance exercises. They're really good for your muscles. And I always say, as you get older, to be honest, you know, if you struggle to do aerobic exercises like walking or even going up and down the stairs, just do those get yourself a band. They're about £4.50 on Amazon or something. Do some exercises, just stretching your muscles. As you get older, that's more important, I think.
Well, Janet, that's been really excellent. And as many people are saying, it's been a brilliant talk, very inspirational. And I think you've launched our Future Lives, you know, this new group of ours, which we hope is going to reach so many people. And your talk was sold out very, very quickly. I don't know. I mean, we had 5,500 people respond to the housing questionnaire.
Wow.
From the same article that was in the online newsletter. So we might well have had 5,500 at the talk today if capacity hadn't been limited to 500 on the Zoom license. But it's been really brilliant. And if I could thank everybody and also say this is the first talk of our Future Lives group. The talk it has been recorded, and our website page, and Julie will put the slide up again that gives the address of our website page. that in a couple of weeks' time, you'll have details on the website page of how to download the recording. And I know a lot of people weren't able to be here today, were very disappointed. So hopefully they'll be able to see it there then. And also just a reminder that our second talk is going to be something to inspire you about the importance of design and how even quite small things in your home can make a huge difference to your future well-being and independence. And Professor Jeremy Meyerson is an absolutely inspirational speaker. You can find him on YouTube talking about design, and he's done so much work on this field over the last 30 years. And I hope you'll all be able to come to that at 2 o'clock on the 30th of November. And then after that, we'll have dates. We have Samir Gray, who's again going to talk to us about how we can keep ourselves fit and well as we age. And then I'll give some comments on. Many thanks to all of you who filled in the housing questionnaire. We've got some really interesting information coming up there about both what you've done and are thinking of doing to your homes. And again, we hope to follow that up next year with quite a bit more detailed research, because it's a very important thing for us. We can share information about, you know, where to get the best advice, what works best. And also for those of you who think you may need to move, one of my aspirations in doing the housing questionnaire had been that there aren't enough options for us. We need many more options that suit our varying, differing needs. And my hope is that, I mean, we've had 5,500 so far fill in the questionnaire. My original aspiration was if we get to 10% of our 400,000 membership, that's 40,000 people, we could really start to influence the change, the choices available to us. And one thing I've been struck by the comments so far, big interest in cooperative, co-housing type of schemes, which we don't really do in this country. They do them in other things, but it's a way of living a bit more informally, but in a supportive, they can sometimes call intentional communities. You know, people choose to live around other people. You're not in a, and many people want to live in multi-generational communities. So obviously some want to live in older people's housing schemes, but by far the majority of us want to continue to live in a multi-age community, and we need a lot more choice. So if you haven't already filled in the questionnaire, it's on our webpage. Fill it in, get your friends to fill it in, because primarily it will help you think, what can you do to make your home safe for you as you age, support your independence. But secondly, we're going to use this data to try and influence the choices that we have. So I urge you all to do that. And I look forward to seeing you all on the 30th of November. And thank you very much for coming to Future Lives. Spread the word, because we all need to take our future well-being into our own hands. Thank you very much indeed. And here's the details. And for those of you who haven't yet found our website, it's here, www.u3a.org.uk/r-impact/future-lives. And that's where we will build up a whole series of information and articles and things that we hope will become a resource that people will want to use. And thank you, Julie, very much for all your assistance and support today. So that's it. Thank you.